I never thought a simple firewood shed would land me in the middle of a war with my Homeowners Association. But there I was on a Tuesday morning in October, staring at my open shed door while steam practically came out of my ears. My name is Kevin Sanders, and I have lived in the Meadowbrook Estates community in Asheville, North Carolina for 3 years. The neighborhood was one of those modern developments with cookie-cutter houses painted in approved shades of beige, tan, and gray. Every lawn had to be exactly 2.5 inches tall, and God forbid you park your car on the street overnight. But I played by the rules because my wife loved the location, close to her job at Mission Hospital, and our kids had great schools nearby. The firewood shed was something I built 2 years ago after getting approval from the HOA. It took me 6 months of back and forth paperwork, 3 revised plans, and a personal appearance at a board meeting, but finally, they gave me the green light. The shed was 10 feet by 12 feet, painted gray to match my house, and positioned at the back corner of my property. I used it to store the firewood I split every fall for our fireplace. Living in the mountains meant cold winters, and there was nothing better than a real wood fire on a January evening. That morning, I walked out to grab some firewood because temperatures had dropped overnight, and I wanted to get a fire going. But when I opened the door, instead of seeing my neatly stacked oak and hickory, I saw something completely different. The shed was stuffed with HOA property. There were traffic cones, orange safety vests, signs reading HOA meeting tonight, boxes of paperwork, a folding table, chairs, and even a pressure washer that belonged to the community. My firewood had been shoved into one small corner, and some of it was actually outside, getting rained on and ruined. I stood there for a solid minute trying to process what I was seeing. Then I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures from every angle. I documented everything inside that shed, the time stamp clearly visible on each photo. Then I walked back to my house and called my wife Sarah. "They did what?" Sarah asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "They are using our shed for storage, all of it. HOA supplies everywhere. My firewood is basically destroyed. How did they even get in? Did they break the lock?" I had not checked yet. I walked back outside while still on the phone. The padlock I had installed was gone, replaced with a completely different lock. A shiny new combination lock hung on the door. "They changed the lock," I said, feeling my blood pressure spike. "They actually cut off my lock and put on their own." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That is trespassing. That is destruction of property. Kevin, you need to call someone." "Oh, I am calling someone, all right." I hung up and immediately dialed the HOA management office. The phone rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. This is Brenda speaking." "Hi, Brenda. This is Kevin Sanders from 4782 Maple Drive. I need to speak with someone about an urgent matter." "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Sanders?" "The problem is that the HOA has broken into my personal property, removed my belongings, and is using my firewood shed for storage without my permission." There was a pause. "Let me check our records. Can you hold, please?" Generic elevator music played for almost 5 minutes. I paced back and forth in my driveway, watching a few neighbors drive by on their way to work. Finally, Brenda came back on the line. "Mr. Sanders, I am showing here that the structure at the back of your property was designated as community storage space." "Excuse me. That is my personal shed. I built it. I paid for it. I have the receipts and the approval forms." "According to our records, the board voted to repurpose it 3 weeks ago at the monthly meeting." "Nobody asked me. Nobody told me. You cannot just take someone's private property." The notation here says that since the structure was built with HOA approval on property that falls within the community guidelines, it can be utilized for community purposes when needed. I actually laughed, but it was not a happy sound. Put me through to the HOA president. Right now. The president is not available at the moment. I can have her call you back. Who is the president? Veronica Hart. Of course. Veronica Hart had moved into the neighborhood about 8 months ago and immediately got herself elected HOA president. She was one of those women who seemed to think being in charge of an HOA meant she was running a small country. She was probably 55, always wore pantsuits even to casual neighborhood events, and had that haircut that every middle-aged woman in a position of minor power seemed to have. I had seen her at a few community events, and she always had this condescending way of talking to people, as if everyone else was slightly stupid. Tell Veronica I need to hear from her today. Not tomorrow, today. I will pass along the message, Mr. Sanders. I hung up and went inside. My hands were shaking from anger. I sat down at my kitchen table and started going through the paperwork from when I built the shed. Every document clearly stated it was a personal structure on my property. Yes, it needed HOA approval because of the community guidelines about outbuildings, but that did not make it community property. I spent the next hour scanning every document and creating a digital file. Then I started researching North Carolina property law. From what I could find, what the HOA had done was absolutely illegal. They had no right to enter my property, remove my belongings, break my lock, or use my structure without permission. This was textbook trespassing and destruction of property. My phone finally rang around 2 in the afternoon. I did not recognize the number. Hello, Mr. Sanders, this is Veronica Hart from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. I understand you called the office this morning. Her voice was clipped and professional, the kind of tone that immediately set my teeth on edge. Yes, I did. Your association broke into my shed, destroyed my property, and is using it for storage. I would hardly call it breaking in, Mr. Sanders. The structure is on community-governed property. It is on my property. I own the land. I built the shed. This is not community property. When you signed your HOA agreement, you gave the association certain rights regarding structures built within the community. I gave you the right to approve or deny building plans. I did not give you the right to seize my property and use it however you want. Veronica sighed, like I was a child who could not understand simple concepts. Mr. Sanders, the board voted on this. We have a severe storage problem. The community storage unit we were renting became unavailable, and we needed immediate space. Your shed was the obvious solution since it is rarely used and is positioned in a convenient location. Rarely used, I use it constantly, and even if I did not, that does not give you the right to take it. We are not taking it. We are sharing it for the benefit of the community. Without asking me, without compensating me, after destroying my firewood and breaking my lock. The firewood is still there, Mr. Sanders. Half of it is outside getting ruined by rain. The other half is shoved in a corner and completely inaccessible. That represents several $100s worth of wood and dozens of hours of my labor. I am sorry you feel inconvenienced, but the needs of the community must come first. I am sure we can work out some sort of compromise. The compromise is you remove your stuff from my shed immediately and pay for the damaged firewood. That is not going to happen. The board's decision is final. Something in her tone made it clear she thought this conversation was over, that she had won simply because she said so. Then I guess I will be taking legal action, I said calmly. There was a pause. I would advise against that, Mr. Sanders. Fighting the HOA rarely ends well for homeowners. We have significant legal resources and the authority to place liens on your property if you refuse to comply with board decisions. You are threatening me. I am informing you of the reality of your situation. Have a good day." She hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. I could not believe what had just happened. An HOA president had essentially told me that she could steal my property, and there was nothing I could do about it. Sarah came home around 6 that evening. She worked the early shift at the hospital and was exhausted, but when I told her about my conversation with Veronica, she was furious. She threatened to put a lien on our house. For what? For wanting your own property back. Apparently, the HOA has unlimited power and can do whatever they want. That is not how it works. That cannot be legal. We spent the evening researching and making phone calls. I contacted a real estate attorney named Mark who had helped us when we bought the house. He listened to the whole story and then asked me to email him all the documentation. "This is pretty cut and dried," Mark said. "They are absolutely in the wrong. You can sue them for trespassing, destruction of property, and unauthorized use of your structure. The problem is that litigation can take months and cost thousands of dollars. So what should I do?" Document everything. Take photos, videos, keep all communication records. Then send them a formal cease and desist letter. I can draft one for you. Give them 72 hours to remove their property and restore your shed to its original condition. If they do not comply, we file in court. That sounded like a plan. Mark said he would have the letter ready by tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If the HOA wanted to play games, I could play too. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought the biggest bolt cutters I could find. Then I went home, walked out to my shed, and cut off the combination lock the HOA had installed. It fell to the ground with a satisfying thunk. I opened the door and started removing every single item that belonged to the HOA. Traffic cones went into a pile, boxes got stacked, the folding table and chairs were hauled out, the pressure washer, the signs, everything. I piled it all in my driveway, right out front where everyone could see it. It took me almost 2 hours. When I was done, the shed was empty except for what was left of my firewood. I then installed a new heavy-duty lock, this one even stronger than the original. Several neighbors slowed down as they drove past, staring at the mountain of HOA supplies in my driveway. A few waved. One guy named Tom, who lived 3 houses down, actually pulled over, having a yard sale, he joked. "HOA decided to use my shed without permission. I am returning their property." Tom's eyebrows went up. "Seriously? They just took your shed?" "Cut my lock, moved my firewood, filled it with their stuff." "Man, that is crazy. Veronica has been on a power trip lately. She tried to find me last week because my grass was 2 3/4 inches instead of 2.5. I told her to get a life. We chatted for a few more minutes. It turned out a lot of neighbors were getting fed up with Veronica's strict enforcement of every tiny rule. She had fined people for leaving their trash cans out 3 hours too long, for having the wrong shade of white on their window trim, for parking in their own driveway instead of the garage. The HOA was becoming less of a community organization and more of a dictatorship. Around lunchtime, a car pulled up fast and parked at the curb. Veronica got out, her face already red with anger. She was wearing a burgundy pantsuit and sensible heels. Her short blonde hair was styled perfectly, and she had on way too much makeup for a Wednesday afternoon. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing at the pile in my driveway. "I am returning your property. You seem to have accidentally stored it in my personal shed." "We discussed this yesterday. The board has designated that structure for community use. And I told you that is not legal. This is my property, and you had no right to use it. You are being extremely difficult, Mr. Sanders. All we asked was to share a space that you barely use. You did not ask. You took. There is a difference. A few more neighbors had stopped now, watching the confrontation. Veronica seemed to notice the audience and lowered her voice. If you do not allow us to use the storage space, I will have no choice but to fine you for non-compliance with HOA directives. Fine me for what? For using my own shed. For failing to cooperate with community needs. I actually laughed. You cannot fine me for that. There is no rule that says I have to turn over my personal property to the HOA. The board has broad authority to enforce community standards. This has nothing to do with community standards. This is you wanting free storage and thinking you can bully homeowners into giving it to you. Veronica's face got even redder. I will be filing a formal complaint against you. This behavior is unacceptable. Good. File whatever you want. My attorney will be sending you a cease and desist letter this afternoon. That seemed to catch her off guard. Your attorney? Yes. Turns out what you did is called trespassing and destruction of property. Both are illegal in North Carolina. We are the HOA. We have the right to manage community property. This is not community property. This is my property. And if you come onto my land or touch my shed again, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Several neighbors who were watching actually murmured in approval. Veronica looked around and seemed to realize she was not going to win this argument in public. This is not over, she said coldly. You are right. It is not. I will also be billing you for storage fees. Storage fees? Yes, you used my shed without permission for weeks. The going rate for storage space in Asheville is about $150 a month. So I will be sending you an invoice. That is ridiculous. No more ridiculous than you stealing my shed. Veronica turned and walked back to her car. She peeled out, leaving rubber marks on the street. Tom came back over, grinning. Dude, that was awesome. I have wanted to tell her off for months. I am so tired of these power-hungry HOA people, I said. We pay dues for basic maintenance and community events, not to be harassed. Amen to that. Mark emailed me the cease and desist letter around 3 that afternoon. It was beautiful. Legal language that basically said the HOA had 72 hours to pay for damages, provide written acknowledgement that my shed was private property, and cease all harassment. If they failed to comply, we would file a lawsuit for damages including trespassing, theft, property destruction, and emotional distress. I printed 3 copies, put one in the mail certified to the HOA office, hand-delivered one to Veronica's house, and kept one for my records. When I dropped off Veronica's copy, she answered the door in yoga pants and a t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back, and without all the makeup, she actually looked like a normal person, until she opened her mouth. What do you want? She snapped. Cease and desist letter from my attorney. You have 72 hours to comply. She snatched the envelope from my hand. You are making a huge mistake. No, you made the mistake when you decided to steal my property. Have a nice day, Veronica. I walked away before she could respond. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. I expected some kind of response from the HOA, but nothing came. The pile of their supplies sat in my driveway. I was not going to move it. If they wanted it, they could come get it. On day 4, I received a letter from the HOA. It was not an apology or compliance with the cease and desist. It was a notice that I was being fined $500 for creating an eyesore by leaving HOA property in my driveway. The letter stated that I had 10 days to remove the items, or the fine would increase to $1,000. I called Mark immediately. They find me for their own stuff, I said, reading him the letter. Mark actually laughed. Oh, this is perfect. They are digging themselves deeper. Keep that letter. Do not pay the fine. We are definitely going to court now. Should I move their stuff? Absolutely not. Leave it exactly where it is. Take dated photos every day showing it is still there. I followed his advice. Every morning I took photos of the pile from multiple angles with that day's newspaper visible in the shot to prove the date. On day 7, things escalated. I came home from grocery shopping to find that someone had spray painted a message on my driveway. In big red letters, it said, "Respect the HOA." I immediately called the police. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I showed them the vandalism and explained the whole situation with the HOA. So you are saying you think the HOA president did this? One officer asked. He was young, maybe 30, with a skeptical expression. I do not know if she personally did it, but this started because of our dispute. You have any security cameras? I did not, which I immediately regretted. No, but I am installing some today. The officers took photos and wrote up a report. They said without evidence, there was not much they could do, but they would patrol the neighborhood more frequently. After they left, I went to the hardware store again and bought a complete security camera system. I spent the rest of the day installing cameras covering my driveway, front yard, backyard, and specifically my firewood shed. That night, Sarah and I were having dinner when my phone rang. It was Tom from down the street. Hey man, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Veronica is going door to door trying to get people to sign a petition to force you to comply with HOA demands. You are kidding. Nope. She came to my house about an hour ago. Said you were being difficult and threatening the harmony of the neighborhood. Wanted me to sign something saying I support the board's right to use your shed. What did you tell her? I told her exactly where she could stick her petition. But I thought you should know she is trying to turn the neighborhood against you. Thanks for the warning, Tom. After dinner, I decided to be proactive. I drafted my own letter to the neighbors explaining my side of the story. I kept it factual and included copies of the documentation showing the shed was my private property, photos of how the HOA had filled it with their supplies, and the cease and desist letter from my attorney. I printed 50 copies and spent the evening walking around the neighborhood, putting them in mailboxes. Several people were outside and actually stopped me to express support. It turned out Veronica had created enemies all over the community with her strict enforcement and condescending attitude. People were tired of being treated like children who could not manage their own properties. A woman named Rita who lived on the next street over told me she had been fined 3 times in the past 2 months for minor infractions. My porch light was the wrong color temperature, she said, shaking her head. Apparently it was too blue and not warm enough. I mean, who even measures that? The more people I talked to, the more I realized this was bigger than just my shed. Veronica had been abusing her position for months, and people were afraid to speak up because of the threat of fines and liens. By the end of the evening, I had an idea forming. The next morning, I created a Facebook group called Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners United. I sent invitations to every neighbor whose email or social media I could find. Within hours, 30 people had joined. By that evening, it was up to 70. People started posting their own stories about HOA abuse, unreasonable fines, selective enforcement of rules, threats, and harassment. One guy had been fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway because it was a commercial vehicle, even though half the neighborhood had similar vehicles. A woman had been cited for her garden being too colorful and not matching the approved aesthetic. The group quickly became a place for people to vent and organize. Someone suggested we vote Veronica out at the next board election. Someone else pointed out that according to the HOA bylaws, we could call for a special election if we got signatures from 30% of homeowners. There were 240 homes in Meadowbrook Estates. We needed 72 signatures. Within 3 days, we had 90. I submitted the petition to the HOA office, demanding a special election within 30 days as allowed by the bylaws. Veronica's response came in the form of another fine. This time I was being cited for organizing against the HOA board and fined $1,000. Mark loved it. "She is panicking," he said. "Every move she makes is more evidence of harassment and abuse of power. Keep everything." We are building an amazing case. The special election was scheduled for exactly 30 days from the petition date. In the meantime, the battle intensified. Veronica sent out a mass email to all homeowners claiming I was a troublemaker trying to destroy the community. She said that without strong HOA enforcement, property values would plummet and the neighborhood would descend into chaos. I responded with another Facebook post, this time including the storage fee invoice I had created. I had calculated that the HOA had used my shed for approximately 6 weeks. At $150 per month, prorated, that came to about $225. I added the cost of my damaged firewood, $150, and the cost of replacing my lock, $30. Total invoice, $405. I sent it certified mail to both Veronica and the HOA office. The response was another fine, this time for fraudulent billing practices. By now, the legal fees were adding up, but Mark assured me we would recoup everything when we went to court. He had filed the lawsuit 3 days ago, naming both Veronica Hart personally and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA as defendants. The special election was held on a Saturday morning at the community center. Almost every homeowner showed up, which was unheard of. Normally, these meetings had maybe 20 people. Veronica stood at the front of the room looking defiant. She was wearing a navy pantsuit and had prepared a whole PowerPoint presentation about why she should remain president. "I have dedicated countless hours to this community," she said, clicking through slides showing various neighborhood improvements. "I have enforced the rules that keep our property values high and our neighborhood beautiful. If you remove me, you are opening the door to disorder and decline." When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. "I am not running for HOA president," I said. "I do not want the job, but I think we need leadership that treats homeowners with respect, not threats. We need a board that understands the difference between reasonable community standards and petty tyranny." Veronica used my personal property without permission, damaged my belongings, and then tried to fine me when I objected. She has done similar things to many of you. Is that the kind of leadership we want? The room erupted in applause. We voted by secret ballot. When the results were announced 2 hours later, Veronica had lost by a landslide. She received only 18 votes out of 204 ballots cast. A retired engineer named Phil was elected as the new president. He immediately made a motion to rescind all fines that Veronica had issued in the past 6 months pending individual review. It passed unanimously. Veronica sat in the front row, her face pale and her hands clenched. When the meeting was over, she stood up and addressed the room one last time. "You have all made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "This neighborhood will fall apart without proper leadership. Property values will drop. Standards will decline. Do not come crying to me when everything goes wrong." She grabbed her purse and walked out. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I was in my backyard splitting more firewood when I heard a loud crash from the front of the house. I ran around to find that someone had thrown a brick through my living room window. Glass was everywhere. The brick had a note tied to it with string. The note read, "You destroyed my reputation. Now I am destroying your property." This time when the police came, they took it more seriously. The note was clear evidence that someone with a grudge was targeting me. I showed them my security camera footage, but unfortunately, the angle did not capture whoever threw the brick. The cameras showed a figure in dark clothing and a hood approaching from the side yard, but no face was visible. "We will increase patrols," the officer said. "And I recommend you keep all your doors and windows locked. If you see anything suspicious, call 911 immediately." I filed an insurance claim for the window and upgraded my security system again, adding motion-activated lights around the entire property. 3 days later, someone slashed all 4 tires on Sarah's car. This time, the cameras caught it. The footage clearly showed a woman matching Veronica's build and hair color approaching the car around 2 in the morning. She was wearing dark clothes and gloves, but when she turned her head at one point, the camera caught her profile. I called the police and showed them the footage. They agreed it looked like Veronica, but said they would need to confirm it. 2 detectives went to her house to question her. Veronica denied everything. She claimed she was home asleep at that time and had no reason to vandalize our property. Without a clear shot of her face, the police said they could not press charges yet, but they were investigating. The next HOA meeting was tense. Phil had taken over as president, and he immediately addressed the situation. "We are aware of the ongoing dispute between a homeowner and the former president," he said carefully. "The board wants to make it clear that we do not condone any form of harassment or vandalism. We have referred the matter to local authorities, and our legal team is reviewing all previous actions taken by the former board to ensure they were appropriate." He then turned to me. "Mr. Sanders, on behalf of the HOA, I would like to formally apologize for the unauthorized use of your property and any damages that resulted. The board has voted to reimburse you for all costs related to the shed incident, including damaged firewood, the replacement lock, and your storage fee invoice. We are also rescinding all fines that were issued against you." I was honestly shocked. I had expected to have to go through the entire court process. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate the board taking responsibility. We also want to propose new bylaws that clearly define the limits of HOA authority and establish a grievance process for homeowners who feel they have been treated unfairly. We never want something like this to happen again." The meeting continued with actual productive discussions about community issues. It was refreshing to see the HOA functioning as it was supposed to, as a helpful organization rather than an authoritarian nightmare. But the vandalism continued. Someone spray painted my fence. Someone poured paint stripper on the hood of my car. Someone left a dead rat on my doorstep. The police stepped up their investigation. They started monitoring Veronica's house and movements. On the 4th incident, they caught her. It was about 3 in the morning when my phone rang. I jerked awake and saw it was a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Sanders, this is Detective Williams with the Asheville Police Department. We have arrested Veronica Hart for vandalism and criminal mischief related to the incidents at your home." I sat up, fully awake now. "You caught her?" "Yes, sir. She was caught on camera approaching your property with a can of spray paint. Officers were in the area and apprehended her before she could do any damage. She is currently in custody." Holy cow. "You will need to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement and review all the evidence. We will be pressing multiple charges." After I hung up, Sarah and I sat in bed in stunned silence. I cannot believe she actually kept doing it, Sarah said. What did she think was going to happen? I think she genuinely believed she was above the law, like being HOA president gave her some kind of immunity. The next morning, I went to the police station. Detective Williams showed me all the evidence they had collected. In addition to catching Veronica in the act, they had found paint and spray paint cans in her garage that matched the vandalism at my house. They had also enhanced the earlier security footage using some kind of facial recognition software and confirmed it was her. She is being charged with multiple counts of vandalism, criminal mischief, and harassment, the detective explained. The district attorney's office is taking this seriously because of the pattern of behavior and the clear evidence of intent. What happens now? She will have a bail hearing. Given that she is not considered a flight risk, and these are non-violent crimes, she will probably be released on bail. But she will have to stay away from you and your property. There will be a restraining order. I gave my full statement, detailing everything from the shed incident through all the vandalism. It took almost 2 hours. When I got home, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word had spread fast about Veronica's arrest. My phone was blowing up with texts from neighbors expressing support and shock. Tom came over that evening with a 6-pack of beer. We sat on my back porch and talked about the whole crazy situation. I knew she was intense, Tom said, but I never thought she would go this far. Vandalism? That is insane. Power corrupts, I said. She got a little bit of authority and convinced herself she was in charge of everyone's lives. When people pushed back, she lost it. Think she will go to jail? I do not know. Probably probation and community service for a first offense, but her reputation is destroyed. Good. Maybe other HOA presidents will think twice before going on power trips. The court process took several months. Veronica initially pleaded not guilty, which meant it went to trial. Mark represented me in a civil lawsuit running parallel to the criminal case, suing her personally for damages. The trial was almost anticlimactic. The prosecution had overwhelming evidence. Security camera footage, the recovered vandalism materials from her garage, her own notes and journals where she had written angry rants about me, destroying her authority, and testimony from neighbors about her threatening behavior. Veronica's defense, attorney tried to argue that she had been under extreme stress and was not thinking clearly. He painted her as a dedicated volunteer who had snapped under pressure. But it was hard to sell that story when the evidence showed repeated, calculated acts of vandalism over several weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. The judge was not sympathetic. Mrs. Hart, you were in a position of trust within your community. Instead of using that position responsibly, you abused it. When you were rightfully removed from that position, you engaged in a campaign of harassment and vandalism. This behavior is completely unacceptable. I am sentencing you to 18 months in jail, suspended to 9 months of probation, 300 hours of community service, and full restitution to Mr. Sanders for all damages. You are also permanently barred from serving on any HOA board in North Carolina. In the civil case, the jury awarded me $45,000 in damages, covering not just the direct costs of repairs and replacements, but also emotional distress and punitive damages. Veronica had to sell her house to pay it. The whole experience changed how our HOA operated. Phil and the new board implemented sweeping reforms. They created a homeowner bill of rights that was added to the bylaws. They established an independent review board for any fines or disputes. They limited the board's authority to only what was specifically outlined in the bylaws, with no room for interpretation or expansion. Property values did not plummet, as Veronica had predicted. In fact, the neighborhood became more popular because word got out that we had a reasonable, functional HOA. People were tired of HOA horror stories and were actively seeking out communities with reformed governance. My firewood shed remained my firewood shed. I refilled it with properly seasoned oak and hickory, and every winter evening when I carried wood inside to build a fire, I remembered the whole crazy situation. It became a good story to tell at parties. Sarah joked that I should run for HOA president myself, but I declined. I had seen firsthand what that position could do to someone who wanted power too much. I was happy being a regular homeowner who just wanted to live in peace and burn wood in my fireplace. The neighborhood Facebook group I had started remained active, but instead of being a place to organize against tyrants, it became a friendly community forum. People posted about lost pets, recommended local businesses, organized block parties, and discussed community issues in a civil, productive way. About a year after everything settled, I was outside stacking firewood when a moving truck pulled up to Veronica's old house. A young couple got out and started directing the movers. I walked over to introduce myself. "Hi, I am Kevin. I live a few houses down. Welcome to Meadowbrook." The husband shook my hand. "Thanks, I am Jason. This is my wife Emily. We are excited to be here. We heard this neighborhood has a really good HOA, which is rare." I smiled. "It does now. Let me know if you need anything." As I walked back to my house, I felt a sense of satisfaction. We had taken something broken and fixed it. We had stood up to a bully and won. And we had created a better community in the process. That night, sitting by the fireplace with Sarah, watching the flames dance over the logs from my shed, my personal shed that nobody could take from me, I reflected on how something as simple as firewood storage had led to such a dramatic series of events. "Do you ever regret making such a big deal out of it?" Sarah asked. "I mean, it was just a shed." I shook my head. It was never just about the shed. It was about the principle. If I had let Veronica get away with it, she would have kept pushing boundaries. She would have kept bullying people. Someone had to stand up to her. Well, I am proud of you. Even when it got scary with the vandalism, you did not back down. "I had good lawyers and security cameras," I joked. "But seriously, I think the whole neighborhood is better off now. People are not afraid of their own HOA anymore." The fire crackled and popped, filling the room with warmth. Outside, snow was starting to fall, the first significant snow of the season. It would be a cold winter, but I had plenty of firewood. In my shed where it belonged. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note. I recognized Veronica's handwriting from all the HOA correspondence. "You were right," it said. "I did become exactly what I hated. I hope you and your shed are happy together." It was not quite an apology, but it was something. An acknowledgement. I threw the note away and did not think about it again. Life in Meadowbrook Estates returned to normal, but it was a better normal. The HOA actually served the community now instead of ruling over it. People felt comfortable reaching out with concerns or suggestions without fear of retaliation. The board was responsive and reasonable. I continued to be an active member of the community, attending meetings and volunteering for neighborhood events. But I never sought a position of authority. I had learned that power, even small power over a suburban neighborhood, could corrupt if you let it. My firewood shed stood at the back of my property, sturdy and secure, holding nothing but firewood as it was always meant to. Sometimes when I walked past it, I remembered that crazy period when it became the center of a neighborhood war. But mostly, it was just my shed, serving its purpose, causing no drama. Tom and I became better friends through the whole experience. We got together most weekends to watch football or work on projects around our houses. He had started his own small battle with the old HOA board over fence regulations, but under Phil's leadership, they had worked out a reasonable compromise within a week. "Remember when it would take 6 months to get approval for anything?" Tom said one Saturday while we were installing a new gate in his backyard. "Now they actually respond to emails within a few days. It is amazing what competent, non-crazy leadership can accomplish," I agreed. Rita, the woman who had been fined for her porch light color, had joined the HOA board after Veronica was removed. She brought a common-sense approach to rule enforcement. Under her influence, many of the pickier regulations were revised or eliminated entirely. "If it is not affecting property values or creating a legitimate nuisance, we should not be regulating it," she said at one board meeting. "People should be able to live in their homes without walking on eggshells." The neighborhood took on a more relaxed vibe. People still maintained their properties because they took pride in their homes, not because they were terrified of fines. Kids played in the streets more often. Block parties became regular events instead of rare occurrences that required extensive HOA approval. As spring arrived and the weather warmed up, I started thinking about my next project. I wanted to build a workshop behind my garage. It would require HOA approval, but under the new system that no longer filled me with dread. I submitted my plans to the board with detailed drawings and specifications. Within 2 weeks, I received approval with only minor suggestions for adjustments to ensure the building matched the neighborhood aesthetic. No drama, no threats, no power games. The workshop went up over the course of a summer. Tom helped with the framing, and several other neighbors pitched in at various stages. It became a community project in the best sense, people helping each other because they wanted to, not because some authority figure demanded it. When it was finished, I threw a barbecue to thank everyone who had helped. Phil stopped by and admired the workmanship. "This is what an HOA should enable," he said. "People improving their properties in ways that work for them, with just enough oversight to maintain community standards. Not the authoritarian nightmare we had before." "I will drink to that," I said, raising my beer. As the sun set that evening and people lingered in my backyard, talking and laughing, I felt genuinely grateful for how things had turned out. Yes, it had been a difficult few months. Yes, there had been stress and conflict and even criminal behavior. But it had led to real positive change. The Firewood shed incident, as it became known in neighborhood lore, was a cautionary tale that people told new residents. It was a reminder of what could happen when small authority went to someone's head, and what could be achieved when a community stood together against abuse. I continued to split firewood every fall, stacking it carefully in my shed. It was meditative work, the rhythm of the axe, the smell of fresh cut wood, the satisfaction of seeing the pile grow. And now, knowing that my shed was secure, that my property rights were respected, that I lived in a community with reasonable governance, the work felt even more satisfying. Winter came again, and I once more carried logs from my shed to my fireplace. Sarah and I sat by the fire on cold evenings, reading or talking or just enjoying the warmth and light. Our lives had returned to the peaceful routine we had sought when we moved to Meadowbrook Estates. The story could have ended badly. If Veronica had been smarter about her vandalism, if the security cameras had not caught her, if the neighborhood had not rallied behind me, if the new board had not implemented reforms, things might have turned out very differently. I might have been crushed by legal fees, driven out of my home by a vindictive HOA, or forced to live under petty tyranny. Instead, the outcome was justice. Real, satisfying justice. The wrongdoer was held accountable. The victim was compensated. The system was reformed. It was almost too tidy, too perfect, but it was true. Every detail I have shared actually happened, documented in police reports, court transcripts, and HOA meeting minutes. One day, about 2 years after the whole situation had resolved, I was at the hardware store buying supplies for a deck project when I saw Veronica. She was in the paint section, looking at color samples. She had aged noticeably. Her hair was grayer, her face more lined. She looked tired. Our eyes met for a moment. I could have said something, could have been petty or rubbed in her downfall. Instead, I just nodded and moved on. The battle was over. There was no point in prolonging it. I do not know what happened to her after she sold her house and moved away from Meadowbrook. I assume she rebuilt her life somewhere else, hopefully having learned something from the experience. But that was not my concern. My concern was my own life, my own community, my own firewood shed. As I drove home that day, I thought about how a single incident can spiral into something much larger, how standing up for a principle can become a catalyst for change, how communities are only as good as the people who lead them and the citizens who hold those leaders accountable. My firewood shed stood in my backyard, doing exactly what it was built to do. No drama, no conflict, just a simple structure serving a simple purpose. And that was exactly how it should be. The years passed peacefully after that. I continued to live in Meadowbrook Estates, watching the neighborhood evolve and improve. New families moved in. Kids grew up. The HOA remained functional and reasonable under Phil's leadership, and eventually under others who followed the same principles. I never forgot the lesson I learned during those few intense months. That seemingly small things can matter enormously. That abuse of power must be confronted. That communities are strongest when people work together. And that sometimes the fight is not about winning or losing, but about establishing what is right. My firewood shed became a symbol of all that, at least in my own mind. Every time I opened that door, I remembered what I had fought for and why it mattered. Property rights, personal autonomy, freedom from arbitrary authority. These were not abstract concepts. They were real and important and worth defending. Sarah and I eventually became grandparents. Our kids had grown up and started families of their own. On winter visits, I would take the grandkids out to the shed to help carry in firewood. They loved the responsibility, carefully selecting logs and hauling them to the house. "Why do you have so much wood, Grandpa?" one asked. "Because I like to be prepared," I answered. "And because this wood is mine in my shed on my property. Nobody can take that away." It was perhaps a deeper answer than a 6-year-old needed, but I felt it was important. Teaching the next generation about property rights and standing up for yourself started with small lessons like this. The neighborhood continued to thrive. Meadowbrook Estates became known throughout Asheville as one of the best managed HOA communities in the area. Real estate agents specifically mentioned our reasonable governance as a selling point. Property values did not just hold steady, they increased. Veronica's dire predictions about chaos and declining standards never materialized. Turns out people could be trusted to maintain their properties and be good neighbors without constant threats and fines hanging over their heads. Who knew? I served on various HOA committees over the years, always advocating for minimal regulation and maximum freedom. I helped revise the bylaws multiple times, each revision stripping away more unnecessary rules while maintaining the core standards that actually mattered for property values and community harmony. The shed remained. The firewood remained. The principle remained. And I remained vigilant, always ready to stand up if I saw the HOA starting to drift back toward authoritarianism. But under good leadership, and with engaged homeowners, that drift never happened. Looking back on everything now, from the perspective of years and peace, I could see the whole arc of the story. It started with an outrageous act of theft and trespass. It escalated through confrontation and legal action. It exploded into vandalism and criminal behavior. And it resolved with justice, reform, and lasting positive change. Not every HOA horror story ends so well. I knew that. I had read countless tales online of homeowners crushed by unreasonable boards, forced to sell their homes, or bankrupted by legal fees. I was fortunate in many ways. I had the resources to fight back. I had a community that supported me. I had clear evidence of wrongdoing. I had competent legal representation, but I also had determination. I refused to be bullied. I refused to let someone steal my property and get away with it. That determination made all the difference. The Firewood shed stood as a monument to that determination. A simple gray structure, 10 by 12 feet, filled with split oak and hickory. It was not impressive. It was not fancy, but it was mine, and I had fought to keep it that way. And in the end, that fight had made my community better, my neighborhood stronger, and my own sense of justice satisfied. The Firewood kept me warm through many winters. The principle kept my spirit strong through all seasons. That was the real story of my Firewood shed and the HOA that tried to take it. Not just a tale of conflict and resolution, but a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought over the smallest things, because those small things represent something much larger. Freedom, rights, dignity, respect. I won those battles, one board meeting and court appearance at a time. And my Firewood shed remained my Firewood shed now and forever.